Hello, awesome people. I hope you're having a great day today. Today we're taking a look at the fourth and final short story in the Farewell to Lankhmar series by Fritz Leiber for you folks. It's called The Gray Mouser Goes Below, and it's actually a novel. It's about 231 pages in it. I knocked it out in 5 days. I did 50 pages a day for the first 4 days at about an hour and 15 or 20 minutes a day. And then last night I knocked it out in about an hour for the last 31 pages. So I knocked it out pretty quickly for you folks, and I did a little bit more than an hour read each day except for the last day. I enjoyed it. I'd never read this collection before, if you'll recall. When I picked it up, after I read the third collection in the series, the Gray Mouser and Fafhrd series, and set in Lankhmar. And then I picked it up after I read the third one, figuring I was probably going to read it, but then I just wasn't. By the time I got there from Amazon, I just was no longer in the mood. So now going back and rereading the series again about 15 or 20 years later, for this channel, I've read these 4 things as well for you folks. So there you are. Starting in the second to last short story in the first collection, previous to this one, called the Frost Monstream, is the beginning of a storyline that has been continuing through a novella afterwards called the Ramo, and then these 4 short stories are continuing that. And so forth. And this novel, The Gray Mouser Goes Below, is also a key element of that aspect of what's been happening previously. So it just picks up where the previous ones have been lefting off. It's a little different than the previous ones in this short story, where they are often just here's the next short story, right? And they might be starting in the same like city or something like that, but there's not this connective tissue. However, there are a few short stories in here that feel like they're written for the collection rather than just written to be published and so forth, and that have our connective tissue, like the one that connects the second short story with the fourth. And it's just connective tissue. It just connects what's been happening and gets in. It takes like a couple of years and has them journeying and so forth. But doesn't really have a plot, doesn't really have an ending, right? It's hard to judge it on, it's a short story, right? And so there are those sort of connective tissues in here and so forth. Anyway, so one of the key things that's happening here with this novel is that, and so I keep my reviews all spoiler free, but basically what's happening, and you'll find this out in the first few pages of the novel, is that our main character, Gray Mouser, annoyed the god Loki in a previous adventure. And Loki has come back from his coma that he was in, that Gray Mouser rather put him in, and now he goes to Death and says, "Death, take him." And so now Death is against Gray Mouser, and he sets out some stuff in order to take out Gray Mouser for you folks. And so that is the short story, and so forth. Then the title of this novel comes from the fact that about 40 or 50 pages in, Gray Mouser disappears into the ground from where they are, and he's taken underground. So that is where the title of this novel comes from. So there you are. I won't give you any more spoilers other than just that, which you'll find out in the first hour of reading. So there you are. I'll go ahead and leave you to it. So what winds up happening, obviously since the Gray Mouser is going below, the Fafhrd and him are being separated, and so this will then divide into multiple sections and so forth. Now, typically what I like for a novel length thing, right, 231 pages that took me 5 days to read, is a novel length, sort of an epic plot and so forth. And this really doesn't have that sort of an epic ending. Also, there are some things that it sets up in the early parts that aren't in the ending, and I'm like, what's going on, right? And so forth. Also, separating your 2 main characters isn't exactly, I think, a great plan either for a novel, right? It gives you multiple angles and so forth for trying to figure out multiple things and that sort of a thing. So I just don't feel this as much because it just doesn't have an epic story. Like the Rama was a novella, it's more epic feeling than this, and I read it in like 2 days, right? I read this in 5 days, and it has a much more epic feeling, right? So if I'm going to spend 231 pages, right, it should feel like I was worth 231 pages, right? Also, as an FYI, for the first time in this series, there are 2 sex scenes, and they're pretty detailed, and they take like a chapter each. They're pretty long, and that's the first time in this series. It's actually pretty rare. Typically, the stuff that was being written during the pulp era, when this is getting written, the first short story was published in 1939, Two-Sided Adventure. You just typically don't see sex scenes like this, and so forth. So seeing 2 sex scenes that are pretty detailed and graphic. This is definitely a novel that's meant for adults, and it's the first time that I've read that in this series, and it was actually a little surprised because it's actually not that common for this time or for this series. So there you are. I'll go ahead and leave you to it. So what do I think about it? Well, I'm probably just going to be giving it. It's definitely well written, but it's got way too much description, not enough plot. I don't like its overall central conceit. I just don't feel like it has this sort of an epic feel to it or anything like that that I would want for my things. So I'm only going to be giving this probably just a 6.5 out of 10. But it's definitely well written. I think it's probably worth your time. I'll link you to this collection in the comments below in case you've read it. This stuff is very influential, and Fritz Leiber is in the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Hall of Fame. This series has won Hugo Awards. He's also won Hugo Awards for other things. He also was a protege of H.P. Lovecraft, and we have one of his stories reviewed for you previously in the Cthulhu Mythos, which H.P. Lovecraft created. He started getting published in 1939. His Two-Sided Adventure in the series is his first publication. And then he publishes at every decade from the 30s till the early 90s when he dies in 1992. He's very, very prolific. It's one of the most heavily read stuff. This series in particular is heavily influential in modern fantasy because it creates the thief character. So if you're playing a thief in like a video or role-playing game or a tabletop role-playing game, or you're reading a thief character in a novel or a short story or a comic, you're probably reading stuff that were created here by Fritz Leiber in this series. So it's heavily influential. Also the Thieves Guild that he creates and the politics of it, it's also here. And then you also have this big giant seedy city called Lankhmar that dominates the plane, that also is heavily, other writers have copied from. So he's heavily influential, so you can't read modern fantasy without reading him. In fact, in the 1979 edition of the Dungeon Master's Guide for the role-playing game called Dungeons & Dragons, the co-creator Gary Gygax has an appendix called Appendix N, where he lists in it all the key influences that he got his ideas from, and this is a key influence that's listed, him in the series. So this is a key thing, heavily influential in modern fantasy. That's one of the reasons why we're reading it. As a reminder, the name of my channel is The Worst Thing About New Books, which is a quote by French philosopher Jacques Joubert, who said that the worst thing about them was that they kept us from reading the old books. And somebody who died decades ago and has published heavily, as like him, and is heavily influential, is definitely a key reason for me to do a deep dive into him. Also, so there you are. Go ahead and leave it too. Have you read this novel? The Gray Mouser goes below. If so, what did you think about it? Let's talk about the comments below. Do you agree or disagree with my 6.5 out of 10? If you want to talk about comments or spoilers or the ending or anything like that, let's do it. If you enjoyed this, why not hit that subscribe button? There should be a lot more of these to follow. And then finally, I just want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your day and investing it and watching my video, because we all have so many things that are happening in our lives and we're pulled in so many different directions. So the fact that you spent this time with me is incredibly humbling, and I appreciate it. So thanks again, and have an amazing day.